been a golden afternoon, and I remember having the familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer.
What if we... Okay, so maybe we just try this for this one episode. And if it doesn't work, then we move on.
Yeah.
But we'll call this like top of the show.
Okay.
And maybe you and I spend 5 minutes and we just talk about what's been on our mind.
Okay.
Like art-wise, like what have we seen that's influenced or brought out some kind of reaction over the past 7 days since we last sat down?
Yep.
Maybe this is something we do week to week, maybe not. But we always touch on little things in the conversations that we have.
Yeah.
But this might be cool to just be like, hey, watch this week, did this, saw this, read this. And then we could link that up in show notes. And if we don't like it, we can always just take it out in the edit.
Yeah. I like that.
So I guess to start off, like we spent a lot of pre-show talking about Elia Kazan, but specifically one of his films from 1969 called The Arrangement. I watched it on Tuesday or Monday or just in the past week and left it. I had to pause it multiple times because I was like, man, this is just a little bit, this is a lot to take in at one time. Almost like watching certain like Cassavetes films, but it wasn't in that style. I mean, it was very like melodramatic 60s kind of.
Heavy-handed, is that?
Some of it was heavy-handed. Some of it was just like trying to do 100 million things at once, and I'm not necessarily sure if it pulled it off or not.
Yeah.
But it moved me immensely. And, when you finish something and you're like, wow, I don't know if I like that, but it moved me.
Yeah.
And then 7 days go by, especially for me, like if 7 days go by and I'm still thinking about a film, it usually means something. Like it's worth revisiting. There's something in there that's worth continuing to look at. And so The Arrangement by Elia Kazan, it really just... Yeah, I'd say it moved me in the last week, and we spent a lot of time talking about that. And the concept is kind of like, it's almost like a midlife crisis film, but it's basically this guy who figures out that he's just serving all of these, just not necessarily false idols, but just this like, he's bought into this world,
the modern,
this arrangement,
advertising, marketing complex.
Yeah, he's bought into it, and he wakes
Selling.
up, halfway through his life, and he's like, man, this is nonsense.
Yeah.
I don't like this. And it was a really interesting watch, and I highly recommend it. And then the other thing, Alone in the Wilderness, which is an old PBS documentary about this guy called Dick. His name was Dick Pernicke. And when he was 51 years old, he moved out to... Everybody's like, man, I know what kind of vibe Alex is on recently, but he's 51 years old. He moved out to the wilderness, the Alaskan wilderness, and he started, he built a cabin by hand using hand tools, and like literally built this thing, recorded the whole thing on a 16 millimeter camera, Bolex.
Yeah.
And took photos
documented
of nature, documented it all.
Yeah. Did he speak to camera at all? Was there any,
no
audio?
Because I'm sure it was kind of like the K3, right? It's just
no crystals. Yeah.
But that got me excited. Again, it opens the possibility. I'm like, wow, like, you're in the Alaskan wilderness. You got to be able to deal with weather, and you got to be like, you're not going to be, he had no electricity. You're not going to be charging batteries or anything. So yeah, it really kind of reiterated to me and gave me a new appreciation for the K3 in terms of just like, this has its purpose, like as it's a fully mechanical wind up thing. But he documented the whole thing, kept really precise journals. There's a couple of books about it. There's several documentaries. The quality's not great. I was telling Matt, we need to start the restoration push
campaign.
And
get Marty involved. Our old friend Marty involved.
Oh, please, Marty, let's make it happen. But yeah, so those are the two things: Alone in the Wilderness and The Arrangement, that I feel like really kind of...
Which is interesting because they feel like the protagonist in that story is sort of starting at opposite sides of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, you're alone in the wilderness for whatever his motivations were to check out of contemporary society, civilization, and escape to the mountains of Alaska to build this house. And then someone like Kirk Douglas's character, I haven't seen the movie, but from what I saw of that opening scene and all that, someone who isn't going to, but is on a trajectory to maybe something similar.
To do something,
to reject all of the constructs of, and try to make a change in his life from, doing maybe what's expected of him to what he wants. Which for this guy in the woods, something very similar. This is just the idea of like, building something of substance, or like metaphorically or, physically. So there is a
cabin,
a YouTube channel I watch where a guy has a family, sold his business, and he owned property in British Columbia, I think, and he built a cabin there all by hand and documented it on YouTube. And I mean, like it's literally like 30-minute long episodes of just the different angles he sets up of him building this cabin.
Just very methodical.
And every once in a while he talks to camera, just like drinking a cup of coffee or whatever, and he sits down and kind of just very simple terms explains what he did or what he's going to do, or but he built a cabin, he built a sauna, he built like a shelter for his firewood, a kitchen area. I mean, all this stuff.
It sounds so just satisfying.
Yeah.
Just beautiful.
I haven't watched any of his videos for a while because I kind of had the emotional rug pulled out from under me, as I'm sure he did. He had some kind of dispute with somebody who owned the property next to him where they were blasting loud music and doing things to disrupt his filming because they knew he was a YouTuber, and they had some kind of property dispute. He never really went into it. He ended up abandoning everything he had built, and he went somewhere else on his property, farther away from this person, and started over from scratch.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, that's unreal to me. Yeah. The idea of starting over from scratch after all this work that you did to build this.
It's funny because it's like, building is a really physical metaphor for it, but that's exactly what, there's a direct correlation between that and us working through photo projects or writing a script or a story or making a documentary or whatever. It's very similar, right? You have to like gather your materials and then build them into into something. And I just want to give a quick shout out because this is what I was thinking about the whole time is Thoreau, Walden, there's a lot of opinions on that, but that always has been one of my favorite books.
And that book it's called Walden and Civil Disobedience.
Yeah. So Walden is Walden is, I guess, the book. And then there's an essay called, on civil disobedience. Yeah. And, Thoreau is, if you're familiar with Thoreau, then you have opinions about it.
I never read Walden. I know of it, of course. And
it's just a really interesting, and, there's people that try to discredit or whatever, but the idea, the core principle behind it, like, don't get caught up in whatever. It's just like, think about this idea of, rejecting that there has to be a way to do something. And just really quick, one more thing, and then I'll kind of pass it off to you. There's this, I was listening to an interview with somebody on, it was talking about, I don't know how it broke down, but it basically got into the Coen brothers, that little title credit at the beginning of Fargo that says this is based on a true story.
Yeah, right.
And obviously it's not based on a true story.
Yeah.
Who's he was in Shameless.
William H. Macy.
William H. Macy, thank you. So Bill Macy said when he saw that you can't do that.
Right.
And you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to do that. And basically, one of the Coen brothers was basically like,
"Why not?
You can do whatever you want. We're making films here."
Yeah.
And so I kind of think in creating work and in creating life, that's been something I've been like thinking about a lot. Is just do whatever the fuck you want. Like you're allowed to do whatever. Like literally nothing is off limits.
Yeah. The rules.
Yeah. Just you know,
can't do that.
You can't do that. Why not?
Yeah.
Like, you know, and if you're, you know, if you're not happy in how, like, you know, these Dick Pernecki and, you know, Thoreau, like they're not happy with what's going on. Like, okay, then go build a cabin in the woods and do whatever.
I know I keep bringing it up over and over, but it goes back to that that moment from Mad Men, doing what's expected of you versus what you want.
Yeah.
To me, that, you know, a lot of what we talk about comes down to that battle that we have.
Yeah.
What I want to do
Versus what?
versus what's expected
Yeah.
of me. What I
I
should be
think-
doing and what society, culture, civilization puts on you with all of these systems and constructs, and then what you want to do. And maybe it is to peace out and build a cabin and live out in the woods, or it's to not take a corporate job and live in a small apartment and scrape by because you're focused on your work.
Or maybe it is to take a corporate job and
And
you
maybe
know,
it is,
and
yeah,
make,
absolutely.
you know, plenty of money and enjoy
Right.
the, you know, the benefits that come with that and live in a big city and, you know, but you there's no one way for everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody's got different tastes and,
Yeah.
you know, what works for certain people don't work for other people. But there's, and then I got this, I was going to wear this for the pod today, but
Blow up your TV.
John
What?
Prine hat.
I don't know who that is.
So John Prine is best known as a songwriter, I guess.
Okay.
What is? I know that he hates this song, but this is probably like his most well-known song. You know that I think it's David Allan Coe. It's "You Never Even Call Me by My Name." You
vaguely-
call me
yeah.
darling, darling.
Yeah.
So he wrote that one. But he's written.
Yeah.
He has one of the best collections of songwriting. But he has an album, and there's a song called "Spanish Pipe Dream," and we got really big on it a couple of years ago. It's still a great song. The whole album is unbelievable.
Yeah.
But there's a song called "Spanish Pipe Dream," and basically the idea is like he meets this stripper, and they run away together to the country, and it's like blow up your TV, you know, move to the country, blow up your TV, have a lot of kids, feed them on peaches, like just this. It's a wonderful song. But anyways, a buddy of mine told me about this in the John Prine store. So
That makes me think of
got that.
a song from a band that I was like completely fixated on in the early 90s, mid 90s, a band called Ned's Atomic Dustbin. And they had a song that I loved called Kill Your Television.
Kill your television.
And I can't remember. I mean, like if I played the song right now, I would be able to sing to it, but I can't recall the lyrics other than maybe the chorus to know if it's like a profound resonating song or if it's just kind of a cool song.
It's the John Prine though. Definitely recommend.
Yeah.
I re-listened to the album this week, and so that's where my head's at coming into this this podcast. I think is, you know, I'm like 2 steps away from moving to moving to the wilderness.
Well, one thing I wanted to circle back to for just a moment with the arrangement and some of the movies we and I have watched this week. What's interesting to me is just how you're describing the arrangement and how it's presented, how it's made, how the story's told, in contrast with a movie you and I saw, The Zone of Interest, and then another movie I saw, Past Lives, I saw yesterday, and how I very much felt like both of those movies were, you know, a camera observing something that happened.
Yeah.
Especially with the documentary you're talking about, someone who's just sort of filming what they're doing. And I felt like both of those movies, there was a lot of restraint from the filmmakers to sort of just show us what happened.
Yeah.
And again, The Zone of Interest isn't necessarily a documentary, but they're just very basic scenes of what the commandant of this concentration camp is
objective
doing.
of the camera as you can have.
Yeah.
I mean, like this isn't a characteristic of the camera. Maybe it is a little bit, but you know, having the wall, and then what's on the other side of the wall is definitely But that, if anything, that speaks for objective camera. My phone keeps
buzzing in your toolbox.
Yeah. If anything, it speaks to the idea of the objective camera because, you could point away and choose not to show that wall.
Right.
And suddenly that's introducing
Yeah.
a level of subjectivity. But yeah, no, I think that idea of just a completely objective camera is.
And there were a few moments in past lives where they made a very subjective choice.
Yeah.
And it worked really well for me because of the restraint. And then in these powerful moments, they let go of that restraint to do something with the imagery to kind of drive the point home without being. I think you could argue that it's heavy-handed in a sense that it's hard to misinterpret what it means, even though there's shades of interpretation within that what it means. So sort of, if this documentary of this man building the cabin, even though it's subjective in the sense that he's setting up the camera for himself versus a filmmaker setting up a camera in a world that he's observing or we're observing, from that documentary to the Zone of Interest to Past Lives to this film with Elia Kazan, made by Elia Kazan, that's a little bit more, at least my interpretation, a little heavy-handed, possibly a little didactic, like really trying to communicate a point of view.
Yeah, some of it definitely. I really can't explain.
Yeah,
I'm just perplexed about it, right? Because sometimes typically. First of all, I watch probably more films than most people should spend their time. But most things don't stick with me that long. Like I'll think about it for a couple of days. Most things I'm over by the morning. Like I wake up and it's on to the next.
Yeah.
And this has just been stuck with me all week. And I was telling Matt, like one thing Elia Kazan does is he understands human psychology really well. And like he's tapping into that, that very core vein of what it means to be a human and to have human feelings and have those influenced by an environment. But I don't know. Some of it's heavy-handed, some of it has a clear perspective, and some of it's just I don't know. Yeah, the only way I can describe it is like go watch it. And some people I'm sure are going to be like, not for me.
Right.
Give it a chance though. Watch all the way through. And
well, we'll put the trailer that you showed me in the show notes. That was all I needed to see to be like, I am watching this movie because it resonates so deeply with all of the forces in play in my life between the conversations we've had about art and commerce, the role of the work that I'm making in the greater advertising marketing complex as it relates to YouTube. And so a lot of what I was seeing there was very resonant with me. And then also what we talked about earlier, the role that technology plays in mainlining this stuff into our minds and our bodies. Again, advertising, marketing, desire, individualization, all these things that we've talked about over the last year with this podcast. Yeah, it's wild stuff.
So I'm interested, like, what did you have any like takeaways from the objective camera? Because you were kind of going in a direction. I do feel like I cut you off, and I want to kind of hear what you're like. Has that changed the like? One thing I noticed, I was watching, so I think it was Pennebaker. There were documentaries though for the Kennedy administration.
Yeah.
In the 60s. And I was watching, one of them was on Max, and I went through and I watched it. They're like an hour long or something. And one of them was on the admission of the first black students at the University of Alabama.
Right.
And then the governor of Alabama at that time, George Wallace, like segregation, the antithesis of like that, I guess that more civil rights guided like Kennedy train of thought. And you had the filmmakers filming Wallace and then filming more so Robert Kennedy in this
Yeah.
case, but it was George Wallace and then Robert Kennedy and John Kennedy in bits and pieces. But one thing I did was I turned to Audrey and I was like, this is so just objective.
Yes.
In a sense, like,
Yeah.
as much as you can, like, obviously you're looking at it, and as a viewer, you're going in, especially as a viewer, 60 years later, we're going in and we're looking at this. We know how it turned out. Segregation, obviously not a good period of American history. One of these guys turned out to be extremely, not correct in the eyes of history. At least, as much as you can say that. But I turned to Audrey and I'm like, this is just, it's like they filmed him having breakfast and whatever. And I just think of how unobjective a lot of everything is these days, especially like if you're doing a film on a political piece, like, okay, you're going to take that. And I know a lot of filmmakers, and a lot of good filmmakers who would probably go in and this is the right idea, right? Like segregation and bad thing. Let's highlight that.
Yeah.
But there was just something that was really amazing about just like how objective the camera was. It was just like, hey, these are just forces.
Right.
And we're going to observe these forces and trust the viewer to be able to not need to be told that this is bad or this is good.
Right.
But also that this isn't completely black and white. Like this, real people on all sides with real internal conflicts and external influences. And I just thought it was, I don't know. I just wish I don't wish, that's something I appreciate. And I want that to be a quality of the work that I produce. And then I want to seek out more work that's able to do that.
I'm right there with you. I mean, watching The Zone of Interest, watching Past Lives, even though there are, less objective choices made in the storytelling in that film, I do still feel like I just got to be a voyeur in a sense on moments in these people's lives. And, certainly while a wide shot to a medium shot, a close up is I don't mean this in a negative sense. It's going to manipulate my emotions and my understanding of it.
It's a narrative screenplay as well. Like, there's things that are decisions that are being made, but
exactly. And that happens in The Zone of Interest. It's not like they just set up a camera and like in a cross section of the house and we just watch people, going about their lives. There were definitely choices made, but so much objectivity just watching a scene unfold, a simple moment between a mother and a daughter, or I come up from action movies and Spielberg and like all this like very heavy camera movement, storytelling, cinematography. I mean, like all this so much that is like consciously made and chosen, that there was just something really resonant with watching The Zone of Interest. The theater, it's like one of those movies where it's quiet and you're like, if you chew your popcorn too loud, like you're adding to the soundtrack of the movie versus what I'm used to. Like go see the Avengers and you can shred a bowl of popcorn and nobody even knows what you're doing.
You're having a full on conversation with somebody right next to you and nobody's even.
And what interests me about that is, everything from the content that I found myself gravitating toward consuming on YouTube, which is sort of like photography videos or people just kind of like just watching them do their thing, like live their lives, type on a computer, make themselves dinner, a little bit of voiceover talking about this or that, stuff that's just simpler and much less, fewer ingredients.
Yeah.
And then just myself and the stuff that I've been exploring on the photography side, making photography videos that are just simply sort of stills video form, but still images. And then the photos with probably the music being the most
Yeah.
prominent ingredient in the sense of how it communicates how you might, how you should be feeling while watching it. I don't recall there really being any music in the zone of interest. I mean, obviously, like the sounds is
It's very
a soundtrack.
industrial. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was important because there's gunshots going off in the background, trains pulling up into the concentration camp, juxtaposed with the sound of a stream and the sounds of a seemingly quote unquote normal family living their lives in this house. So yeah, I find myself gravitating towards content that doesn't create feelings in me through the ingredients of cinema and cinematic storytelling, but sort of just presents me with something to observe, and the feelings develop from those from what I observe.
I think that's. I just want to really quick. There's this idea of like the cinematic, like the visual metaphor. I think that's kind of what cinema is there for in a way.
Yeah.
Like giving us imagery to explain our lives and our feelings and whatever. And I think that when work is less, hey, I'm going to give you a lecture. Hey, I'm going to teach you. You're allowing people to supply, you're giving them the visual to work with, or the sound or whatever you're giving, and then you're allowing them to come in and provide this key. Like you're providing the base of the triangle, and then they're coming in and bringing this lived experience, and providing that third point and everything it connects. And some people have different metaphors for different things, and that does there's no one right visual metaphor. There was a case this week where we did something where we used an icon or something. Yeah. And somebody was like, well, this means this. And I just thought it was funny because in the idea of that piece, like we designed it around, we took that and gave it an association in the piece. Yeah. So like that's just a symbol. That's just an icon. Right. And by how we're using it, we're creating our own metaphor for it. Right. And then that allows it to be, but then somebody saw it and the comment was, this means this. Isn't that a little confusing? And it's like, well, no, we can reappropriate it. Like that's completely within the realm of possibility. And I think a lot of work that, at least recently, that has moved me more is able to do that more so than like, oh, look, I'm right. What we saw the movie trailer where it was like, I don't write questions, I write answers or something. Yeah. It's like, all right, the ego to think that you've got the answers is pretty astounding. Yep. We are little blips on the timeline of history, and all we can do is write questions, I think. Yeah. I'm sorry for hijacking that, but no, I just think that it's good. I think that the idea of like providing metaphor and then room for interpretation is a much more noble pursuit in creating work.
Well, I think that even goes back to our previous conversations on this podcast about something as simple as just naming your photographs. Like we talked about naming a project, a body of work, a collection of photographs that maybe add up to something. But then individual photographs, and we've joked around about some of my naming habits in the past, whether it was something that was,
what was the short film title?
Grâce de pitié.
No, come on, give it to us.
Terrible.
Give it.
Grâce de pitié. And just that ego, right? The ego and the role that it plays, and wanting to make sure that I'm in control of how I'm perceived. Right. And I think, a journey that I'm on and the work that I'm creating, especially as I transition from thinking about commerce first, in what I make, and that being a priority because I've got student loan debt and bills to pay and all this stuff, the arrangement, piping in, advertise, all this stuff. Got to get that Vision Pro, got to get that new, Toyota 4Runner, got to get all that stuff. And sort of moving more towards creating work from a place of self-expression or asking questions or being curious, wondering, what is this? I don't know. I took a picture of it. What do you think?
Yeah.
And seeing that shift in the work that I'm drawn to, the photography books that you've shared with me and the different street photographers and photographers who simply, present what feels like more objective frames for you to see what you see in them.
Yeah.
Especially I think of Stephen Shore and just like a plate of food in a diner. And it's just like, it can hit me like a cement truck.
Yeah.
But then somebody else is, it affects them in a different way. Obviously with something as powerful as the zone of interest, there's not a massive range of interpretation to take away from what you're observing there. But I appreciate the storyteller, the filmmaker, the observer, giving it to us in a way that is as objective as possible when choosing to make work around something.
Auschwitz,
rebuilding the past in front of a camera and then filming it in very deliberate,
I think
intentional ways.
I walked away from that with such first of all, the film is very detached.
Yeah.
And how that I guess that maybe is a part of being objective is you kind of have to be removed in the filming. It is there's a distance between the frame and the subject matter.
Yeah.
But it humanizes better than any film I've seen in recent memory. I mean, maybe that's not exact, but it does a very good job at humanizing. Yeah. And you're humanizing Nazis, right?
Right.
You're humanizing people that are directly, involved in just some of the,
the greatest atrocity
that we've seen. Yeah. And you're doing a really good job at humanizing these people. And you can leave that with some really interesting takeaways.
Yeah. And
hopefully you leave it with, because I don't think Glazer had any intention to be like, I don't think he sees this as like a binary thing.
Sure.
Like good and evil.
Right.
I think he sees it as a more nuanced, there's a lot of factors that went into getting people to the point where these, atrocities were commonplace.
Yeah.
And when you get to the point of that, these are the lessons from history.
Right.
And I think it's, that's another one that moved me.
Yeah.
It was very illuminating. I think it's worth a watch.
Absolutely. I'm glad we saw it. And not only just what I could take away from how the work was made and the choices that were made by the filmmakers, but what you learn about the human condition.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this in some of our post-movie chats, the banality of evil. You're sort of one charismatic orator away from being convinced or persuaded or brainwashed, whatever you want to use the term, to being okay with, in order to achieve your dream. They talk about this in the movie of having a home and kids out in nature, out of the city. I'm sure they had, that money wasn't a concern because he was well paid as the most efficient commandant of a concentration camp and all that. And sort of like where you have the capacity to go to fall in line with what this person dictates and what you're willing to do to get what you want.
Yeah. I think when we start to lose touch with that, that's when that's the most dangerous thing.
Right.
It's not. I'm sorry, but there's very little chance we lose touch with. We can identify the atrocities as that.
Yeah.
That's not the issue. That's not why people say study history.
Right.
Yes, you don't want to forget that. But we don't want to forget how susceptible we are at any given time to any given thing. I think that's the lesson from history. One of them. I mean, you can't boil it down.
Right.
It's what makes it a great piece of work. There's no 1 or 2 points that are trying. There's no point. That's that there's no it's a little bit of everything. There's the banality of evil. There's the turning your the blind eye to something that because it's a little bit inconvenient to think of. There's there's a lot of factors at play.
Well, and for the wife in that story, her fixation to be around the life that she dreamed of, living in a rural setting, very idyllic. Her kids able to come and go as they please. They're in school. The house is more than what they could have wanted. It checked all the boxes for her, and she was willing to participate in this.
So much pride
atrocity.
When she's showing the mother around.
Yeah. And I know in my life as someone that has sort of dreams of that sometimes are on the more material side, whether it's a nice house or newer vehicles or more money in my bank account or a vacation to Europe or whatever. Sometimes I'm presented at a crossroads. We talked about this earlier, and a corporate job that might be an option for me in the future, or to make a sponsored video with a company that isn't terribly aligned with the content on my channel, but the money that they're talking about, is it worth it for me to sacrifice what I'm trying to do with my channel in order to achieve a financial objective?
Right.
And so, just latching on to what are the things we're willing to sacrifice or to look beyond to achieve what Kirk Douglas has in The Arrangement.
Yeah.
Swimming pool, servant staff, a Jaguar convertible, all this stuff. What are you willing to give up to have these things?
Well, and then this is probably a connection that The Arrangement and I watched Miami Vice last night, the 2006 Michael Mann director's cut.
Nice. I haven't seen it.
It's pretty good. It's fun.
Yeah.
But there's this quote in the movie the quote is just "Time is luck," which you can geek out about it, but time is luck, and I really started thinking about that in the context of all of this, and I've been thinking a lot about just time and whatever. But time is luck. Every bit, don't take the time you have to do anything for granted. Time is luck. Luck is, what is luck, right? Go to a casino, put it on black, spin the wheel.
Yeah.
And the idea of time is luck. You could, I always like to think that you could get in the car and, something tragic could happen. Something tragic could happen right here.
You're setting me up here, buddy. So perfectly.
Well, this is unplanned, but time. Yeah, time is luck.
You literally could not set this up for me any better.
It's just the perfect. It's the perfect. It's just this way of looking at things. If you're doing what others expect versus what you want to do, just think about that. Time is absolutely not guaranteed, and every bit of it you get is just complete. This was not planned, by the way. So Matt, let me preface this. Matt,
for our listeners,
Matt brings this thing, this car part, which I don't even know what it is, into. He brings it into the studio and just sets it down on the table. And I'm like, what is that? Is this a lens housing? What are we doing with here?
For people listening, this is a 2-pound hunk of metal. It's a cylinder, and it has one half looks kind of like a steel pipe. The bottom half looks like a gear would meet up with it to spin it. Inside, there's some gears in there.
So he brings this in and just sets it down. I have no idea what it means. I still don't know what it means. So,
and what's beautiful, what's kind of fascinating about you bringing up the time is luck thing from, Michael Mann's director's cut of Miami Vice. I didn't really know how to tell this story or bring this up. And I thought, well, maybe we'll do a standalone episode because I did have something to kind of posit or talk about or ask you about after, telling the story. But
we might break that off then into a different,
possibly, yeah. But the time is luck thing is certainly one of the takeaways from what this object represents and the story around it. So I'll tell the story. What day is today? Sunday. This was Friday. So Friday, I get done listening to an episode of Tetragrammaton. Not going to go down that path, but the episode inspired me to just like get outside.
Yeah.
I spend most of the week inside at my computer, and the episode, it's a whole thing, but we'll put it in the show notes. It's with Dr. Jack Cruz and Andrew Huberman, and he talks about the role that light plays in human health.
Yeah, you're just like, man, I need some light.
So I was very inspired. I'm like, I'm going to go outside, and I'm just going to. So I'm like, what? It wasn't like a question of what I'm going to do, because for my photography YouTube channel, I go out with these different digital cameras and sometimes film cameras, and photograph different parts of Omaha or different places I travel to, and kind of just get lost in the flow and zone out and take these photos. So I decided this camera that I had, which I have with me, it's a purple Canon Digicam, pretty good value on eBay. And I had bought it off Facebook Marketplace knowing I wanted to make a video with it, but then, sell it for some profit. So it's kind of eating at me. Like I don't want to keep this camera, so I want to get it done, but I also want to make a video with it. So I'm going to go to Midtown Omaha, which is, obviously the sort of the central part of the city between the start of West Omaha and downtown Omaha. It's kind of partly cloudy, a little bit of blue sky. It's a nice day. It's like 52 degrees, all this stuff. So I'm going to go, so I'm just going to go park the truck and walk around for an hour or so. I think I had about 2.5 hours before I had to pick up my daughter. We weren't recording a podcast that day. So I just start going around with this Digicam, and I'm taking photos. I'm walking through parking lots, along the sidewalks. Most of what I'm photographing is an interesting shadow on an old building or a couple skateboarders I asked to take their picture, and they're like, yeah, totally cool. There was a gentleman that, looked like somebody who was, maybe down on his luck. I don't know if he was unhoused or what, but I don't like to take photographs of people that are in like a bad way, whether it's, they don't have a home or they're transient or they're dealing with addiction, substance abuse, whatever. Like I'm not going to take photos of them and then put it on my YouTube channel and all that stuff. So this guy, I asked him, he was interesting looking, and I said, I'm out taking photographs. Do you mind if I take a photograph of you? And he said, yeah, sure, go right ahead. I took 2 photographs of him, asked him what his name was. His name was Chester, and, he went along his way. So I kept going, and there was a family unloading the back of a truck, and I took a photograph of them. And then there was like a playground in between their building and another building, and light was hitting stuff. I'm taking photographs in there. They're kind of looking at me like, who's this tall white guy, all dressed in black, walking around with a purple Digicam taking photographs. So I kind of tell the wife was like taking pictures of me with her cell phone, and then she was in her window and she was filming me. I don't know if she was just like, who is this guy? Or if she was worried she needed to call the police or something. I don't know. But I was in public spaces. I wasn't like walking on people's private property. Keep walking around. And eventually I see this dog running through an intersection by like 24th and Dodge by the Jocelyn Art Museum. And there's a guy chasing after the dog. Has, beige pants on, a gray hoodie, bull's hat on, glasses, clean cut, white guy. And so I stop and, trying to kind of get the dog to come to me to help him get the dog. Yeah. Well, the dog runs away from me, and I just keep walking, and the guy crosses the street. We're on the same side of the street. He's very angry. He jump kicks a bike, like one of those rental bikes.
Yeah.
Kicks the seat, knocks it sideways, yelling for the dog. His voice is kind of hoarse. And I'm walking behind him going, oh, there's some interesting sort of street drama unfolding here. I'm going to photograph this, while it happens. Take a few photographs from behind. He ends up down in the next intersection. There's a younger woman waiting to cross the street, a young man with his dog. and the dog that's on the loose is kind of interested in the dog that this guy has on a leash. The dog's just kind of going all over the place, and I'm just popping off a few wide shots as it happens. So I cross the street. The woman's trying to lure the dog toward her. I take a picture of her doing that and keep walking. And this guy is still chasing the dog around. So I'm still a photograph here or there, nothing crazy. The gentleman with the dog on the leash crosses the street. He realizes he can use his dog to lure this dog in to recover the dog for the guy. That all happens. I take a photograph of the guy who was chasing the dog. He shook the guy's hand because he was able to recover his dog. And then I start walking away. And I just kind of vaguely felt like the guy that was chasing the dog said something toward me. And I just kind of brushed it off. I, kept walking, and then I turned around and I just kind of saw a shot that I liked. I zoomed in on the camera, took the photo, and then turned up the block and started, continuing on my way. I get to a restaurant, and I see like a shopping cart. There's a shadow. I'm taking some pictures in the parking lot of this restaurant. And then I turn to my right, and the guy that was chasing the dog is charging toward me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so my suspicion that he had said something toward me kind of connected. I'm like, he must have said something about being frustrated that I was taking photographs.
Yeah.
So he's charging toward me, and I'm just standing there. And he goes, "Hey, give me that camera." And I'm like, "No."
Yeah.
He comes right up next to me.
Yeah.
Right next to me, and winds up. And, it didn't quite go slow motion, but my brain goes, I see something in his hand. It looks like a steel pipe, like a part of a steel pipe. And then he throws it at my head as hard as he possibly can.
Yeah.
And in that instant, when his arm starts going toward me, I ducked down, like squatted all the way to the ground. Whatever he threw, which is this object,
This thing is not light either.
flew over me and hit the building.
Yeah.
And then, when I recover from ducking, because I squatted to where almost my butt could hit the ground.
Yeah.
I shot out of my lowered stance toward the sidewalk to assess what he was going to do.
Yeah.
And he was running toward this thing to get it to come at me again.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh shit, he's going to come at me again.
Yeah.
So I run across the street against traffic because the signal wasn't up, and I had to go behind a car, and there's a coffee shop up just across the street called Zen Coffee. Not that that's important.
Yeah.
But my thought is I'm going to go inside a crowded place. Like, this guy's not going to come in after me there, and I'll be safe. And sure enough, he had retrieved the object and threw it back at me. And it hit the parking lot, ground, and bounced off next to me as I went into the coffee shop. And I'm looking out the window, the door, and he's yelling at me from the sidewalk and kind of marching away. And I think to myself, well, I need to disconnect visually from this guy to kind of start communicating to him that I'm not going to be accessible anymore, and that he'll kind of give up and go away.
Yeah.
So I'm in the coffee shop for maybe 90 seconds, and I'm like, I want to get out of here. And I open the other door. There's 2 doors to get in. And I go back up to my truck and get in the truck, and I just kind of sit there like adrenaline, obviously, a little bit out of breath, heart pounding, kind of like, what just happened?
Yeah.
Like,
Again.
So I'm
this thing probably weighs like 5.
I weighed it. It's just over 2 pounds.
Yeah.
It feels heavier than it actually is because of the I don't know how substantial it is. So I'm sitting in the truck, kind of get my breath, get my bearings. Like, what do I need to do next? Like, is this a thing? Like, do I need to call the police? Should I call 911? What did this guy actually try to do to me? I'm like, well, first off, I want to go get what he threw at me so I can understand, like, maybe if I know what it was he threw, I'll have a better idea of what his intention was.
Yeah.
And so I go back to the parking lot, and obviously I'm paying attention, like, to see if this guy's still around, like, waiting for me. And probably 10 minutes had gone by, and I'm searching through like the landscaping that's on the edge of the building, and I find this hunk of metal. I'm like, holy shit, like, this guy stood right next to me.
Oh, I mean, this would have killed you.
And he tried to throw this thing at my head.
Yeah.
What the Like he tried to like this thing would have crushed my skull. It would have knocked me out cold. Who knows what he would have done to me had I been on the ground, head bleeding completely. Yeah. This like piece inside will come out. I cleaned the crap out of this thing.
Wild. Yeah.
And I'll kind of talk about that in a second too.
Little token.
Yeah. I'm like, well, I'm not going to take any more photographs. I probably had another hour before I had to pick up my daughter, but I'm like, I guess I'll just go pick up my daughter at preschool and take her home. So, I put this in the footwell of the truck and drive to go get her, pick her up, take her home, put this in a Ziploc bag because I'm starting to think I should probably go to the police, because if this guy is going to do something like this to me, what if he did something like that to somebody in the future? That would really bother me that I hadn't done anything, and this guy's kind of dangerous. So I talked to my wife about it, and she's like, yeah, maybe go to the police station and talk to a police officer or something. Well, I guess it doesn't really work that way after 4:00. It was after 4. I called the report line. They told me that sounds like, someone like tried a very serious assault, if not attempted murder, trying to hit you in the head with this thing. You should call 911, go to the location and talk to a police officer. So I call 911. They don't really think much of it in the sense of like the severity that I felt it was. So they transfer me back to the file a report line, and I talk to a guy, give him all the information. Basically, I'm like, I have photographs of this guy, like clear photographs of the way he looks, all that. They just are kind of like, well, something like this is probably a transient or whatever. Like there's not, the likelihood of finding this person's pretty low. Like we'll file the report and just kind of see what happens. And I'm not like, I want justice, this, but I'm sort of like, this guy could be dangerous. Like, I don't know what
he's willing to do that.
What he's willing to do.
For sure.
So you said time is luck, and that's sort of one of the things that's been running through my mind. And I refer to this often as I've had a sort of luck in my life of winning the lottery in ways other than financial, right? We all dream, not all of us dream, but a lot of people dream about winning the lottery. Checking out of the system, big pile of cash, do what you want. You don't have, you're out of the rat race, right? Well, I have had a lot of lottery wins in my life with an accident that happened with fireworks on the 4th of July, and nobody was hurt by some miracle. I've had, a couple car accidents that wouldn't have been my fault that I was able to avoid by some what felt like a miracle.
Yeah.
What was the other one? Oh, this tree that fell between my house and my neighbor's house, like a gust of wind took this 50-foot tree down perfectly in the center of our house, of our homes, and caused no damage at all. Just little like stuff like that where I'm like, holy shit, you won the
small
lottery.
Wins. Yeah. That you might not even,
And then I'm thinking about this moment and I'm like, did you just win the lottery again by some miracle instinctively ducking the instant that this guy wound up to clock you in the head with this
probably
life-changing hunk of like a car part. Just to kind of wrap up the reaction to what he did. The one head scratcher I have though is if this guy was trying to hurt me and he missed, what made him not just bowl me over and start pummeling me like with fists or some other object nearby? Like, why did he run toward the object to get it, to throw it at me again, when if his intention was to do me harm in that vulnerable position of being ducked down, he could have easily just like bowled me over and pinned me down and just start pounding on my face or kicking me or something.
Yeah.
So the one thing that I've thought is, and this is kind of me interpreting things and analyzing things to death, is, was it possible that he was just trying to scare the shit out of me? And his intention was, had I not ducked down, he would have intentionally thrown this thing. He would have intentionally missed.
Yeah.
To sort of like.
But part of it, like you could just be attributing like he there's a good chance he was probably just schizophrenic. and
entirely possible.
had no, like, there wasn't a thought of like, I'm trying to, it was
Yeah.
throw this at his head,
Yeah.
go get it, do it again.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, there's
Right.
no, there might not be a logical progression
Absolutely.
behind his, yeah.
Yeah. And it
Good
was,
Lord.
it was difficult to assess his mental state because he was so agitated about the dog. He'd been chasing it. I vaguely heard him at one point, like he said something like over an hour, something like that. So he'd been chasing this dog for a long time, and his voice was hoarse and all that stuff. Now, like thinking about the drama of this moment, right? If there was somebody observing this, speaking of observation, if someone was just filming this happen, like in a very objective way, especially if they filmed this person's life that day, woke up, possibly, unhoused, living on the streets, has a dog. I think there was another person that was sort of at the very beginning of where I saw him. There was another person like sort of in the area where he was coming from. So maybe there's somebody that he spends time with. I think he had to have, because if he took the dog back, he had to have the dog secure, but for him to then choose to come back after me.
Right.
And I think about, as someone that really tries to understand what motivates people to do things that are seemingly crazy or irrational or whatever, this guy's been chasing this dog for an hour. He probably has a pretty difficult life, especially if he's living on the streets, and probably had a difficult upbringing, all of that stuff. And he is frustrated beyond belief that he can't get this dog to listen to him and just get back to normal.
Yeah.
A place where he can just feel
No
like
control at that moment.
Yeah, where he's not doing something he doesn't want to do, all of that. And then you've got this tall, seemingly well-to-do white guy with a purple digicam taking pictures of his plight, right?
Yeah.
And the incredulity he must have felt, or the violation maybe he felt from somebody in a place of privilege, maybe, who kind of was trying to help him.
Yeah.
But ultimately taking photos of the situation. I try to think of in his enraged state, to trigger him even further. And this isn't me like sort of like, this is all my fault. Just trying to understand the psychology and the thinking, the emotion of this person. I can certainly see how that would have incensed this person and created those emotions. Now, what he did with them, obviously I don't agree with all that, but I get that feeling.
I mean, you feel like you're being exploited or
something. Yeah. Especially because there's nothing that, like, I'm not wearing a sign that says I'm an art photographer.
Yeah.
I also just like couldn't get a read on what this guy's status was.
Yeah.
My thinking was that, like there was a roughness to his energy.
Yeah.
But my first thought wasn't this guy's, unhoused, or this guy is an addict, or this guy is like, he had like Carhartt pants on, a hoodie, a new looking Bulls hat. Like he had glasses on, short hair, like cut hair.
Yeah.
Like there wasn't anything about him that screamed, someone has a rough life.
I mean, who knows? That could have just been like a breaking point.
Absolutely.
People break.
And I say to myself, and this is part of, the conversation with us when we, I think some people are drawn to street photography because it allows them to overcome some of their fears and overcome some of their issues with exposing themselves to a reaction from someone for doing something that isn't illegal. You're in a public place and you're sort of documenting life, or finding meaning in an interaction between two people, or a mother and a child, or a person sitting alone on their cell phone, whatever it is. You're sort of reading what the universe is putting out there and capturing it in a photograph. Sometimes there can be something therapeutic about pushing through your fears or your concerns or your self-consciousness or whatever it is to take these photographs. And there was definitely a distinct moment when I'm walking behind this person where part of my brain was like, don't take pictures of this. Not like, you're doing something wrong, but it's just sort of like, I don't know, like whatever that feeling is when you're doing street photography and you think to yourself, I don't want to expose myself in this way, or I don't know what it is, pun intended, right?
I feel like
But
those
then
are typically the best thing. That's
right.
almost a sign to push through.
And so I literally told myself, push past this. This is interesting drama. He's chasing his dog through the street. Like this is, objective and obstacle.
Yeah.
Classic drama.
Yeah.
Take a photograph of it. And I did. And there was an element of brazenness to it, I think, standing on the sidewalk while he's running through the intersection. And, with this digital camera, for those listening, I'm kind of holding, you know what it is to take a photo.
The fact
with
that it's like a
Digicam.
purple Canon.
Yeah, purple
is just the
Digicam.
best.
I know. And taking photos. So this is the second time I've been assaulted doing street photography.
Yeah.
I was assaulted in Los Angeles. I took a photograph of a motel, and a young woman was sitting on the curb, and I wasn't 100% sure if she was unhoused or what her situation was, but her silhouette in the photograph is part of what intrigued me for the composition. I took the photograph, and 5 minutes later, she's charging after me with an unfolded, like an unwrapped coat hanger, metal coat hanger. And she smacked me on the arm with it and was screaming at me to delete the photo.
Yeah.
And I tried to be civil with her and told her, ma'am, you're out in public. I'm taking a photograph of the motel, and you're in the photograph, but that wasn't the reason I took it.
Yeah.
And it didn't really calm her down a ton, but I think us connecting and we looked at each other in the face, I think it disarmed her just a touch.
Yeah.
Because she was probably trying to assault her circumstances.
Yeah.
And then like all of a sudden, like I was a person, and it just took her down a notch.
I think that's a key, is just like, and part of that is, if you're living in the streets, maybe you're not making that human connection with people on a frequent basis.
Or you're being mistreated or just ignored.
You're being ignored, or but I do think like sometimes it's just important to look somebody in the eyes.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that for long enough, it becomes easy to kind of create or just buy into whatever the story in your head is.
Yeah.
And put that out. And I think that's actually a good place to kind of tie it. Like we talked about objective camera a lot. Like I want to be clear, like nothing is objective about like objective camera is more of like striving for perfection, knowing you're never going to achieve it. You're like, there's never,
when you make something, it can't be objective.
It can't. Yeah. Like by choosing to set a camera down, you've made a choice.
Yep.
You're choosing what's pointed at. I think it isn't something that's good to strive for. And that's always the Gary Winogrand thing, right? He's like always, I just want to be a camera floating through space. And, but, like just the same way that she's projecting hers, or, he was projecting his circumstances onto you.
The intense subjectivity. And, making subjective conclusions about what my motivation was and what I was there to do.
Yeah. I'm glad you're still with us. Jesus.
I mean, yeah. So and so like, why do I have this? I went through a pretty intensive process of cleaning it, because I knew from the moment I grabbed it, I was going to keep this forever as a reminder of just
how
multiple things,
quickly,
but time is luck. And there was something about cleaning it, that speaks to my psychology, but then also, I don't know, transforming it into something else, like a murder weapon, to a trophy's not the right word, but just like a representation of what happened. So, I mean, I put degreaser on this, soap, I scrubbed it with brushes. I mean, I spent like probably 2 hours trying to clean this thing so that it was, I don't know, transformed into what I wanted it to be.
There was a great John Mayer quote that I heard last week. It was like, you got to keep like tokens.
Yeah.
Because like as time goes on, you forget experiences.
Right.
All like even the most meaningful.
Yeah.
Will start to lose their potency over time. But you can keep like this.
Yeah.
And 30, 40 years, you can pick this up and be like, whew. take you right back into the moment.
Exactly. To never forget.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, I've been inspired by Alex in a lot of ways with photography, with analog stuff. And I tend to appropriate a lot of things from the close relationships I have. This isn't necessarily a criticism, but I'm very much a sponge for the things that other people are interested in and passionate about, from my buddy DJ and his impact on just the clothes that I like to wear. I never used to really wear all black and all that, but it kind of felt good to me, and I'm sure that'll change at some point. But with you and photography, especially film photography, and then really liking, what you had to say about your electronic keyboard, your typewriter. I picked up a typewriter on Facebook Marketplace, and this morning I sat down on my iPad with the Apple Pencil and just kind of wrote something. I didn't like I'm going to write a poem or a whatever.
Yeah.
Like I just wrote stuff, and it just kind of flowed out of me. And I sat down at the typewriter and took what I had handwritten and typed it up into this like 4-page. It looks like a poem. I don't know if it is. It's just something that came out of me. And so I don't think we'll have time to get into it now, but whether we talk about it in a future episode, the next episode, whatever, what I was coming into this wanting to discuss and maybe a little bit prompt you and your thoughts on this was when stuff like this happens to us, not only big things like this that have an impact on us as people, but the micro impacts that we have over our lives and how all those things add up to finding their way into our work. And, for me to sit down and write something, which I haven't really
Done in a
written
while.
something that's creative in quite a while, or sort of like artistic writing.
Maybe not even artistic, just like
I just mean like it's not a script
not
for a YouTube video.
purpose-driven. Yeah. You're not trying to work. You're not working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And then, today my intention is to film the video portion of that.
Yeah.
To go back with the Blackmagic. That's another inspiration from you, the Blackmagic camera, to film the video portion that I need to make that video. But what am I going to do with that video? Is it just going to be the same kind of video as the other ones I've made? Or am I going to be inspired or motivated or in that kind of idea of writing a diary entry? Am I going to come up with something else that, I don't know, that whatever. So to be continued, but just wanting to have a conversation about when things like this happen to us, how it gets transformed into our work, and maybe the good, the bad of that. Is it therapy? Is it self-serving? Is it didactic? Is it sharing these? Is it a warning to other people? How does an experience like this transform through the work that we make? How does it make work that we wouldn't have normally made?
Right.
And propel us on whatever journey we're on, however you want to say it, as we develop as people who are trying to make work.
This is a really goofy visual for this, but I almost think of it as like you have a glass of clear water.
Yeah.
When you start adding things to it, those just become a part of that. It's difficult to make that clear again.
Right.
But it becomes its own, or you have a clean block of wood. Over time, it starts to get chipped away at, and you're
right.
Yeah. This is interesting though. I think that's a good place to wrap it.
I think so too.
It had been a golden afternoon, and I remember having the familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer.